When whispers turn to warnings, who do you trust? Your instincts or the unknown? The whispers didn't stop when the sun rose. If anything, they grew louder, worming their way into my thoughts even as I packed up camp. Each word was faint, almost indistinguishable, but the feeling they carried was clear. Danger was closer than ever. Marco was pacing near the edge of the clearing, his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Ava sat cross-legged on the ground, flipping through the notes from the satchel with a frown of concentration. "Anything useful in there?" I asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Ava didn't look up. "There's something about a ritual site deeper in the jungle. It mentions symbols, tests of character, and consequences for failure." "Great," Marco muttered, glancing warily at the surrounding trees. "Another death trap. Just what we need." "We can't stop now," Ava said firmly. "If we turn back, we'll lose everything we've worked for." I didn't miss the way Marco's hands curled into fists. "You mean you'll lose everything?" he snapped. "Some of us didn't come here to chase glory." "Enough," I said sharply, stepping between them. "We need to keep moving. The faster we find this site, the faster we can figure out what's really going on." Neither of them looked happy, but they followed as I led the way deeper into the jungle. The trail grew narrower as we walked, the undergrowth thick and unyielding. The whispers seemed to guide us, growing louder or softer depending on the direction we took. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon an ancient altar, half buried in moss and surrounded by stones carved with the same concentric circles from the letter. Ava practically ran to it, her eyes alight with fascination. "This is it," she said, tracing the carvings with her fingers. "This is what the notes were talking about." "What does it say?" Marco asked, his voice tinged with impatience. Ava squinted at the symbols, mumbling to herself as she deciphered them. "It's some kind of warning. Only the worthy may proceed. To falter is to invite ruin." "That's not ominous at all," Marco muttered. The whispers grew louder as we stood there, and I felt an almost magnetic pull toward the altar. It was as if the island was waiting for us to do something, but what? Before we could decide our next move, Marco stepped forward, ignoring Ava's protests. "This is just another scare tactic," he said, brushing away the moss on the altar. "We've seen this kind of thing before. Empty warnings to keep people away." "Marco, don't—" Ava started, but it was too late. The ground trembled, and with a deafening crack, spears erupted from the ground in a circle around the altar. Marco froze, the sharp points stopping mere inches from his body. "Move!" I shouted, pulling him backward just as another set of spears shot up where he had been standing. The three of us scrambled away from the altar, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell was that?" Marco demanded, his face pale. "The island," Ava said, her voice shaking. "It's testing us." We didn't set up camp until we were well away from the altar. The jungle felt more oppressive than ever, the trees pressing in like silent witnesses to our growing fear. As we sat around the fire, the tension between us boiled over. "You almost got us killed back there," I said, glaring at Marco. Marco threw up his hands. "Oh, come on. You really think some magical island is judging us? It's just traps, mechanical, man-made traps." "Then why didn't it trigger when we were near the altar?" Ava countered. "It only reacted when you ignored the warnings," Marco scoffed. "You're reading too much into this. It's just another puzzle, and puzzles have solutions." "Puzzles don't whisper in your head," I said, my voice low. Marco's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I hesitated, unsure if I should tell them about the voices, but when I glanced at Ava, I saw a flicker of understanding in her expression. "You hear them too," I said, realization dawning. She nodded slowly. "They're faint, but yes, I hear them. They're trying to tell us something." Marco laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Great. Now you're both hearing voices. Maybe the jungle's got some hallucinogenic plants messing with your heads." Ava glared at him. "Or maybe you're just too stubborn to listen." "Enough," I said again, though my voice lacked its usual force. "We'll figure it out tomorrow. Right now, we need rest." That night, the whispers changed. As I lay staring at the canopy above, the voices grew clearer, weaving themselves into dreams that felt too real to be dreams. I saw myself standing on the edge of a cliff, watching as Ava and Marco disappeared into the mist below. The voices whispered accusations, each one more damning than the last. "You'll fail them, just like before." When I woke, drenched in sweat, I found Ava sitting by the fire, her knees drawn to her chest. "You heard them too," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the dying embers. I nodded. "What did they say to you?" She hesitated, her voice barely audible. "They showed me destruction, the island burning, and us gone." Before I could respond, Marco stirred in his sleep, mumbling something I couldn't make out. His face was twisted in fear, and I wondered what the island had shown him. The next day, we stumbled upon the entrance to a cave system. The air here was colder, heavier, and the whispers seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This must be the next test," Ava said, her voice steady despite the unease in her eyes. Marco frowned. "And what happens if we fail?" "No one's forcing you to stay," I said, my patience wearing thin. Marco glared at me but didn't reply. The cave's interior was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were lined with murals depicting a civilization's rise and fall. Figures bowed before an altar, then fought among themselves as flames consumed the scene. "This is it," Ava said, her voice hushed. "The island's history. Whatever happened here, it was catastrophic." The whispers grew louder as we moved deeper and the hallucinations returned, stronger this time. I saw flashes of people I'd lost, failures I'd tried to bury. When we reached a fork in the path, the whispers shifted, each of us hearing something different. "This way," Ava said, pointing left. "No, it's right," Marco argued. I closed my eyes, trying to focus. The voices swirled around me, but one phrase stood out. "Choose wisely. The path forward is not always the easiest." "I think it's left," I said finally. Marco rolled his eyes but followed. The cave narrowed as we continued, forcing us to move single file. Our guide, one of the sailors who had joined us reluctantly, was in the lead. He paused at one point, glancing back nervously. "Something's wrong," he said. "The air feels different." Before anyone could respond, the ground shook, and a cascade of rocks tumbled from above. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Ava's arm and pulling her forward. We made it out of the collapse, but when the dust settled, the guide was gone. Ava's face was pale as she stared at the rubble. "He didn't make it." Marco muttered something under his breath, his expression unreadable. I clenched my fists, guilt gnawing at me. The whispers were silent now, as if satisfied with what had just happened. "We keep going," I said, my voice hollow.